Okay, Vayakhel basically is repetition of Parshas Teruma, and Pikude is a repetition of Parshas Tetzaveh. However, there's one glaring, very, very glaring distinction between the two, and that's regarding the order of the building of the Mishkan. Whereas in Parshas Teruma, Moshe Rabbeinu begins with the Aron, with the Klei Mishkan, the Shulchan, the Menorah. In Parshas Vayakhel, Bezalel begins with building the structure, the Mishkan, the Oel, the Riosa Oel, and the Yeros of the Mishkan. And only then, later on, does he build the Klei Mishkan. Chazal, in Brachos Adnaf Nun Hey, mention this distinction, and it brings a medrash. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Bezalel al Shem Chachmato Nikra. He was called Bezalel because of his wisdom. Sha'amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, lech emor lo leBezalel aseli Mishkan, Aron v'kelim, halach Moshe v'afach. Moshe changed the seder. In other words, Bezalel was correct. First you have to build a structure, and then you build the Klei Mishkan, while Moshe Rabbeinu inverted the order. Va'amar lo aseh Aron v'kelim u'mishkan. First make the Aron, and then the other vessels, and then make the structure. Amar lo Moshe Rabbeinu, minhago shel olam adam boneh bayis v'achar kach machnis l'tocho kelim. Is that the proper way to do it? First you have to have the house, and then you bring the different vessels into the house. V'ata omer aseh li Aron v'kelim u'mishkan. Kelim shani oseh lecha nachnisam. Where am I going to place the different vessels if the structure doesn't exist? Shema kach amar lecha HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you to do it in a different order. Aseh Mishkan Aron v'kelim. Amar lo, so Moshe Rabbeinu responded, Shema betzel kel hayita v'yadata. It was the fact that you understood that even though I made a mistake and I inverted the order, nevertheless, apparently you are in the shadow of God, and therefore you were able to infer how I was actually told to build a Mishkan, and in fact you were right. First build the structure, and then only later on build the vessels. Okay, that's the medrash, explaining the difference between the different orders, and basically claiming that the real order was the order of Bezalel. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu was erred, and he changed the order. So first of all, to claim that Moshe Rabbeinu erred in giving over Dvar Hashem is a difficult claim. But secondly, I think it's even more difficult when one considers that at the beginning of Vayakhel, so the order that Moshe Rabbeinu tells Bezalel is as follows. Vayom Moshe al kol adap Yisrael lemor, zeh hadavar shetziva Hashem lemor. This is what you should do. V'chol chacham lev bachem yavo v'yasu et kol shetziva Hashem. You have to do what God commanded. Et hamishkan, et oalo, et michseu, et krasav, et krashav, et bichav, et amudav, et adonav. First, he told them, build the structure, and then afterwards, et haron, et badav, et hakapot, et parochet hamasach. In other words, it's not only when Bezalel did it, he did it in a different order. That's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu told him to do. So how can you say that Moshe Rabbeinu inverted the order when Bezalel did exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu told him to do? Not the order that appears in Parshas Teruma, but the order that appears at the beginning of Vayakhel, our Parsha. So it's clear that one can't take this medrash literally, and therefore we have to try to understand what exactly are Chazal trying to tell us by talking about this discrepancy between the order of Moshe as opposed to the order of Bezalel. Before I try to explain that point, I want to note another very big difficulty regarding the Pirush of Rashi. Rashi, in Parshas Teruma, when he talks about placing the Eidut into the Aron, V'l'Aron titen et Eidut asher ten elecha, Rashi explains, what is the Eidut referring to? HaTorah shehi Eidut b'ni u'v'nechem. It's referring to the entire Torah. And in Parshas Pekude at the end, when it says that they placed the Eidut into the Aron, Vayikach vayiten et Eidut el Aron, so Rashi comments, et Eidut haluchot. The Eidut that the pasuk is referring to that was placed in the Aron is the Luchot. So there's a discrepancy between Rashi whether the Eidut placed in the Aron was the entire Torah or the Luchot. So why does Rashi switch the interpretation of what the Eidut means? The answer to this question is very, very simple. That Rashi claims that Teruma Tetzaveh came after Chet HaEgel. And the Ein Mukdamucha Torah, the order of the psukim is not according to chronological order. First, there was the Chet Egel and Kitisa, and only afterwards, after Yom Kippur, did HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Moshe Rabbeinu Teruma Tetzav to bring Teruma Tetzav. So when the pasuk says, "Vel Haron titen Teruma eteni lecha," the edut that I will give you in the future, it cannot be referring to the luchos, because luchos were already given. The first luchos were given Yezayim and Tammuz, then they were broken, and the second luchos were given Yom Kippur, and only after the second luchos was the tzivoy of Parashat Teruma, as Asher Etein Elecha in the future must refer to the Torah. On the other hand, at the end of Parashat Pekudei, you're talking about before the Torah was given. Vayitein et luchot el Aaron, the luchot that they already have. The edut they already have. Which edut they have? The only edut that they have is the luchot edut, and therefore Rashi is forced into explaining that the edut that they actually placed into the Aaron was the luchot and not the Torah. So that explains why Rashi is inconsistent in explaining what the word edut means. However, the dochak in this interpretation is clear. How could you take the same word edut in one place, explain that it's referring to the Torah, and the other place explain that's referring to the luchot, when we're talking about exactly the same thing, the edut that was placed into the Aron? So, in order to really explain what is going on here, I think that we're not talking about a mistake regarding how Moshe Rabbeinu presented it, as opposed to the correct way regarding the order of Betzalel, but rather you're talking about two different orders, two different ways of ordering various different things. You can have a pragmatic order, and you can have an axiological order. If you talk about it in terms of importance, so what comes first? Clearly, the Aron is the heart of the Mishkan, and the most important thing that you begin with, the primary kli of the Mishkan, is the Aron and the edus that lies within the Aron. So if you talk about an axiological order, you begin with the Aron, and the structure that surrounds the Aron and contains the Aron within it is certainly going to be only secondary. But if you could talk about a pragmatic order, so first you build the structure, and then you have the vessels that are placed within the structure. So the order of Moshe is an axiological order, while the order of Betzalel is a pragmatic order. And therefore you're not talking about a mistake, but rather you're talking about two different ways of mentioning the order of the Mishkan and its Kalim. For instance, there's, regarding code of law, we have the Rambam, and you have the Shulchan Aruch. How does the Rambam begin? The Rambam begins Hilchos Yisodei Torah. It begins with the basics. And how does the Shulchan Aruch begin? Waking up in the morning. When it talks about the Moadim, how does the Rambam in Sefer Zmanim, how does he order the Moadim? He begins with the most important, with Shabbos, who has great Kedushas Hayom, and then he goes on to Yom Kippur and to Yom Tov. How does the Shulchan Aruch go? It goes by the calendar. So is one order correct and one order not correct? Rather, one order is an axiological order, the other order is a pragmatic order that goes along with the calendar. It's not that one is right or one is wrong. As a matter of fact, the Ramban, at the beginning of Teruma, notes that the main importance of the Mishkan was the Aron, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu mentioned the Aron first, and then he mentioned the other Klei HaMishkan, and only afterwards he mentioned the Mishkan, because he's talking about what's most important. Ikar HaChefetz HaMishkan hu makom menuchat HaShechina shehu HaAron. And that's why he begins with the Aron, and therefore afterwards all the Kalim and the Mishkan. As Moshe Hegedim b'Parashat Vayakhel Samishkan Etzalo Esmechseu v'chein Etzabetzal Shehu Ra'ui L'Kadim Ma'aseh. But in terms of pragmatically how you should build it, there the order is inverted, and there you begin with the Mishkan, and then only later on you get to the vessels. So that's exactly the point that the Ramban makes. So what Chazal are referring to is not that there's a mistake, but rather it's a question of not only what is most important and what is primary, what is secondary, but also how to go ahead and do it. And Betzalel was right, that the way to do it is to first build the structure and then later on to build the vessels. So what you have here is two different ways of ordering the Mishkan. One basically appears in Parashat Teruma, which is an axiological order, beginning with the Aron, and the other is a pragmatic order. practically, how does one go about to build the Mishkan? Betzalel has to actually go ahead and implement. So therefore, he has the pragmatic order. And if we go back to the question of Rashi, in Parshas Teruma, the Eidos that you're referring to is the vision of the great Eidos that's supposed to be in the Aron, which can only be once the entire Torah is completed. The Eidos that has to go into the Aron in Parshas Teruma, which is talking about the ideal, refers to the entire Torah. However, pragmatically, what they were able to place into the Aron in Parshas Pekudei was all that they had, which was only the Luchos. And therefore, the Eidos that goes into the Aron in Pekudei, which refers to practically what they were able to place there, even though it wasn't totally complete, refers to the Eidos, which refers to Luchos and not the entire Torah. So with this understanding that Parshas Teruma talks about the ideal, the Eidos referring to the entire Torah makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, when you're talking about practically what they were able to place into the Aron, even though it's not necessarily ideal, so you're talking about putting in only the Luchos, even though the entire Torah was not yet given. Rav Soloveitchik once talked about this idea of connecting the question of ideas and vision together with practical ability to implement. In a drasha that where he talked about the idea of tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh. The Gemara says you're not allowed to speak between tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh. So Mori Rebbe explained why does the two have to go together? And he explained that there are some people that have, are people of tefillin shel yad. They're able to implement. They're able to be practical, but they lack vision. While there are other people that have a great vision but have no ability to implement whatsoever. So the ideal is to be able to connect and bring together a great vision and then be able to implement it. You have to bring together Parshas Teruma with Parshas Vayakhel. You have to have a vision of the great ideas and a great vision, and then to be able to actually, like Betzalel, go ahead and to implement that vision. So there has to be a connection, and you're not allowed to be sach bein tefillah and tefillah. You have to be able to combine tefillin shel yad, tefillin shel rosh. You have to be able to combine the great vision of Moshe Rabbeinu and the practical ability of implementation of Betzalel. You have to be able to combine Parshas Teruma with Parshas Vayakhel.